In a high-stakes Pentagon showdown, the general's voice boomed. That hand signal is strictly for SEALs. The blonde major's lightning-fast counter, a perfect echo, cracked the room's tension, suggesting a hidden history and a now-threatened secret life. The air inside Central Command headquarters was a carefully curated illusion of calm. A monolith of dark, tinted glass and reinforced concrete rising from the perpetually damp Seattle landscape. It was the nerve center of a silent, global war. Its corridors, lined with polished granite, were wide enough to drive a truck through and just as silent. The silence broken only by the whisper of climate-controlled air and the soft, rhythmic footfalls of those who walked them. This was a place where careers were not so much built as they were forged in the crucible of immense pressure, and where a single misstep could send a lifetime of ambition plummeting into oblivion. It was a world of calculated words and guarded expressions, a place where the truth was a commodity more valuable and more dangerous than any weapon. Major Emily Carter, a woman whose presence commanded a room without her ever raising her voice, felt the familiar, sterile chill of the building seep into her bones. She adjusted the collar of her immaculate Army service uniform, the olive-drab fabric a stark contrast to her sharp, blonde bob haircut. A faint, silvery scar, almost invisible unless the light caught it just right, traced a delicate arc along her left cheekbone, a silent memento of a chapter in her life she had been ordered to forget. As a top-tier intelligence officer, her mind was a fortress of logic and pattern recognition, a finely tuned instrument for dissecting chaos. But today, she was not the analyst. She was the subject. The evaluation was supposed to be a formality, a routine security clearance review for an officer of her rank and spotless record. But the nameplate on the imposing mahogany door in front of her, Lieutenant General David Hall, changed the equation entirely. The name was a legend in the Pentagon, a byword for a particular brand of ruthless, old-school brilliance. General Hall was a relic from an era where battlefield instincts trumped textbook theory. A man had clawed his way up the ranks with a reputation for being more of a battlefield psychologist than a commander. The whispers in the mess halls and officers' clubs painted a portrait of a master manipulator, a man who used seemingly casual conversations as surgical probes to dissect an officer's psyche. His methods were called everything from genius to intellectual sadism. Emily, having meticulously studied his file, suspected the truth was a volatile mixture of both. She drew a slow, steadying breath, the filtered air tasting of nothing, and knocked twice. The sound was sharp and definitive, echoing down the empty hall. "Enter," a gravelly voice commanded from within. The office was less a workspace and more a monument to power. A massive, deep gray metal desk, looking more like a command console from a warship, dominated the space. Its surface was obsessively clean, holding only a few precisely aligned folders and a single, stark white ceramic coffee mug. The walls were not decorated with art, but with evidence of a life lived at the apex of power. Framed photographs from various war zones, commendations signed by presidents, and vintage strategic maps of forgotten conflicts, their battle lines drawn in faded red ink. The room smelled of old leather, ozone from the humming electronics, and the faint, sharp tang of steel. Behind the desk sat General Hall himself. He was a man in his late 50s, with close-cropped hair the color of gunmetal and eyes that seemed to absorb everything and reflect nothing. He was flipping through a file, her file, his focus so intense it felt like a physical weight in the room. "Major Carter," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. "West Point, top of your class. Intelligence. Deployments to a veritable who's who of global hotspots. Your record is exemplary, a testament to flawless execution and textbook precision." He finally looked up, and his stare was an unblinking, analytical bore. "Have a seat." Emily moved with the fluid, disciplined grace of a career soldier, her posture ramrod straight as she settled into the leather chair opposite him. The chair was likely expensive and designed for comfort, but in the charged atmosphere of the room, it felt like an interrogation seat. Hall continued to sift through the pages of her file, making small, dismissive noises, a hum here, a soft grunt there. The silence stretched, a tactical weapon designed to unnerve her, to provoke a fidget, a nervous glance, any unearned tell. Emily's mind was a locked vault. She would not crack. The only sounds were the faint hum of the building's life support and the crisp rustle of paper. "Tell me, Major," Hall said suddenly, snapping the file shut. The sound was like a pistol shot in the quiet room. "What, in your opinion, is the most significant difference between a good intelligence officer and a truly great one?" Emily had anticipated this line of questioning. It was a classic Hall maneuver, a philosophical query designed to reveal character. Her answer was ready, measured, and stripped of all emotion. "Attention to detail, sir. The ability to discern actionable patterns from ambient noise, and the discipline to know when to act on that information versus when to simply observe." A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched the corners of Hall's mouth. "Textbook. A beautiful, perfectly polished, textbook answer." He stood and walked to the vast, floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the rain-slicked streets of Seattle. "But you know what I think? I think the difference is understanding one simple fact. In this business, everyone is testing everyone else. All the time. Every conversation, every gesture, every seemingly innocent question. It's a probe. A test." He turned back, his expression hardening, becoming predatory. "You young officers, you graduate from your academies with your theories and your simulations. But real intelligence, the kind that wins wars and saves lives, that's learned in the dirt, not in a classroom." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. This was it. This was no longer a security review. This was the legendary test. Emily remained perfectly still, her face an unreadable mask, waiting for his move. He began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back. They watched movies about special operations. Hall continued, his voice laced with a cynical, mocking edge. "They think they know what true warriors endure. They don't. Only the elite understand what real sacrifice looks like." As he spoke, he moved closer to her chair, his right hand dropping casually to his side. His fingers shifted, forming a subtle, almost unnoticeable configuration. To anyone else, it would have been a meaningless twitch, a fleeting, unconscious gesture. But for Emily Carter, it was a lightning strike. Her blood ran cold. The hand signal was unmistakable, seared into her memory from a lifetime she was forbidden to acknowledge. It was a classified Navy SEAL extraction signal. Its meaning was as clear and as terrifying as a siren in the night. Enemy contact. Immediate backup required. AM compromised. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing. 1,000 frantic thoughts ignited in her mind. How could an Army general possibly know such a deeply compartmentalized signal? Was this part of the test? Or was it something else? Something infinitely more dangerous? The logical, career preservationist part of her brain screamed at her to feign ignorance, to pretend she hadn't seen it. It was the safe play, but something in Hall's eyes, a glint of challenge, a cold, calculating dare, told her he was looking for a very specific reaction. Before conscious thought could intervene, muscle memory, honed in the crucible of a forgotten war, took over. Her left hand, which had been resting on the arm of the chair, shifted. It was a movement so swift, so subtle, that it was over in less than a heartbeat. A corresponding countersignal. Hall saw it. His left hand, which had been holding the white ceramic coffee mug, simply went limp. The mug slipped from his grasp, falling in what felt like an eternity of silence. It shattered on the polished hardwood floor, the crack echoing like a rifle shot. Dark, hot coffee splashed across his immaculate, mirror-shined shoes, seeping into the fibers of the expensive Persian rug. But Hall wasn't looking at the mess. His face, weathered and controlled, was drained of all color. His mouth hung slightly open. For a man who had faced down enemy fire and stared into the eyes of dictators, he looked utterly, completely stunned. "Major Carter," he whispered, his voice a fragile, rasping thread of sound in the suddenly silent room. How in God's name do you know that signal? The silence that descended upon the room after General Hall's whisper question was absolute and suffocating. It was a physical presence, a crushing weight that seemed to suck the very air from the space. The shattered remains of the coffee mug and the dark, spreading stain on the rug were a grotesque centerpiece to a moment of pure, unfiltered disbelief. For a man whose legend was built on unshakable composure, Hall's shock was a raw, exposed nerve, revealing a deep fissure in his carefully constructed persona. He stood frozen, his steel-gray eyes, which moments before had been instruments of psychological warfare, were now wide with a dawning, horrified comprehension. Emily, a lifelong master of the poker face, met his stunned gaze with an unnerving, preternatural calm. On the inside, her mind was a maelstrom. Probabilities, contingencies, and potential outcomes were being calculated and discarded at the speed of a supercomputer. The test was over. A new, far more dangerous game had just begun. She had to calibrate her response perfectly. Too much knowledge would be an admission of guilt. Too little would be an obvious lie. Hall was the first to move. His hand, shaking almost imperceptibly, hovered over the secure, encrypted telephone on his desk. He moved with the deliberate, almost slow-motion precision of a man disarming a bomb. The casual, predatory tone he'd employed just moments ago was gone, vaporized and replaced by a voice that was cold, hard, and stripped of all personality. It was the voice of pure, official authority. "I'm going to ask you one more time, Major," he said, his words clipped and sharp. "And I strongly suggest you consider the full weight of your answer before you speak. Where did you learn a classified, Tier 1 Navy SEAL hand signal?" Emily opened her mouth to deliver the carefully constructed, ambiguous response she was formulating, but Hall cut her off with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand. He had already moved past the point of questioning. He had made a decision. He snatched the receiver of the secure phone and punched in a 3-digit extension with brutal efficiency. "This is Hall. I need a security team in my office. Now, full lockdown protocol. Asset is potentially compromised." He slammed the phone down, the sound another jarring punctuation mark in the tense silence. He turned his full attention back to Emily, his face a grim, unreadable mask of determination. "Major Carter, you are not to move from that chair. You are not to speak to anyone. You are not to do anything until this matter is resolved. Do you understand me?" The response came in under 2 minutes, a testament to the base's efficiency in handling internal threats. The office door burst open, not with a knock, but with the controlled violence of a breach. 2 uniformed military police officers, armed and clad in tactical gear, entered first. Their presence was a chilling, immediate escalation, transforming the high-stakes psychological game into a potential criminal matter. They positioned themselves on either side of the door, their expressions impassive, their hands resting near their sidearms. They were followed by a woman who moved with an entirely different kind of authority. She was tall and slender, dressed in a severe, dark civilian suit. Her light blonde hair was pulled back into a tight, unforgiving bun, and her posture was that of someone who didn't just walk into a room but took ownership of it. She radiated an aura of cold, analytical intelligence that was more intimidating than any weapon. "General Hall," the woman said, her voice a sharp, clear instrument that cut through the tension. "Colonel Elizabeth Stone, Defense Intelligence Agency. You reported a potential security breach." Hall, who had regained a fraction of his composure, gestured curtly toward Emily. "Colonel, Major Emily Carter has just demonstrated direct, operational knowledge of a classified SEAL communication protocol, an extraction signal. It is compartmentalized well above her clearance level. I need to know how. I need to know now." Colonel Stone's eyes, the color of a pale winter sky, locked onto Emily. They were the calculating, emotionless eyes of a predator sizing up its prey. There was no anger, no surprise, only a cold, methodical focus that was deeply unsettling. She assessed Emily from head to toe in a single, sweeping glance, taking in the uniform, the posture, the faint scar, the unwavering gaze. Major, Stone said, her voice leaving no room for argument. You're coming with me. This conversation will continue in a more appropriate setting. The term appropriate setting turned out to be a chilling euphemism for a place buried deep within the concrete bowels of the command center. The journey downward was a descent into a different world, a silent, sterile labyrinth far removed from the polished granite and panoramic views of the upper levels. They bypassed the standard elevators, taking a dedicated, key-card-operated lift that moved with a disconcerting speed and silence. The air grew colder, and the pressure changed with each floor they passed. They emerged into a corridor painted a flat, institutional white, the only color coming from the stark red lines on the floor that delineated security zones. This was a place that didn't officially exist on any public schematic of the building. It was a world of reinforced steel doors, biometric scanners, and armed guards whose expressions were as blank and unforgiving as the concrete walls. The final access point was a heavy vault door that hissed open, revealing a small, windowless room. The sense of finality was absolute. It was a place people were brought to, not a place they left of their own accord. The room itself was the physical embodiment of psychological isolation. It contained nothing but a heavy, bolted-down metal table, 3 equally uninviting chairs, and mounted in the corner of the ceiling, a small, black recording device with a single, unblinking red light. The walls were soundproofed, the silence so complete it felt like a pressure against the eardrums. Colonel Stone gestured for Emily to sit. The 2 MPs remained outside, their shadows visible under the crack of the door. Stone placed a sleek, black tablet on the table and activated the recording device with a deliberate, audible click. The sound seemed to seal the room off from the rest of the world. This is Colonel Elizabeth Stone, Defense Intelligence Agency, conducting a security interview with Major Emily Carter, United States Army Intelligence. The subject of this interview is the potential unauthorized access to and dissemination of classified materials, specifically Tier 1 Special Operations Protocols. Major, you are advised that this interview is being recorded, and that any false statements made during this process are punishable under the Uniform Code of Military Justice and may result in criminal prosecution. Do you understand? Understand, Colonel, Emily replied, her voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil raging within her. Stone sat opposite her, her posture as rigid and unyielding as the chair she occupied. She didn't consult the tablet. Her gaze was fixed on Emily, a relentless, analytical stare. Let's begin with your file. It's pristine, almost too pristine. West Point, Defense Language Institute, a string of commendations. You're a model officer, Major, the kind we build recruitment posters around, which makes the current situation all the more perplexing. She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. General Hall is a man known for his theatricality, but he is not a man who makes mistakes about classified protocols. The signal he used is part of a highly compartmentalized system known as Ghost Key. Access is restricted to active members of SEAL Team 6 and a handful of their direct support personnel. It is not something an Army intelligence officer, no matter how exemplary, should know. So, we have a problem. A very serious problem. Emily remained silent. Her training had prepared her for this. The first rule of interrogation was to let the interrogator fill the silence. They would reveal their own assumptions, their own lines of attack. Stone continued, her voice a calm, reasonable monotone that was more unnerving than shouting. There are only a few ways you could have learned that signal, Major. 1. You were briefed on it through an official channel that, for some reason, is not in your file. 2. You acquired it through illicit means, espionage, a compromised asset, a personal relationship. 3. You're not who you say you are. She leaned forward slightly, her pale eyes narrowing. We are going to explore all 3 possibilities. We're going to deconstruct your entire career, piece by piece. We will talk to every instructor you've ever had, every commanding officer you've ever served under, every friend you've ever made. We have time, all the time in the world. The door hissed open again, and a man in a similar civilian suit entered, carrying a thick file folder. He sat next to Stone, opened the folder, and the systematic dismantling of Major Emily Carter's life began. The room felt like a tomb, a place where the past was about to be exhumed, whether she wanted it to be or not. The red light in the corner of the room glowed like a malevolent eye, recording every word, every breath, every flicker of an eyelid, waiting for the one crack in the wall of her meticulously constructed life. For the next 6 hours, the windowless room became Emily's entire universe. The interrogation was a masterclass in psychological attrition. It wasn't about physical force. It was about the relentless, grinding pressure of methodical deconstruction. Colonel Stone and a rotating team of 2 other DI interrogators, a man named Carter and a woman named Davis, subjected Emily to a draining, circular form of questioning designed to exhaust her, confuse her, and ultimately force a mistake. They began with her childhood, probing for any foreign contacts, any unusual travel. They moved on to her time at West Point, asking for the names of roommates, instructors, even casual acquaintances. They dissected her academic record, questioning her choice to specialize in signals intelligence. Every answer she gave was met with a follow-up, a request for more detail, a subtle challenge to her memory. "Let's go through your deployment history again, Major," said Carter, the third interrogator to take a seat across from her. He was younger than Stone, with a cynical, almost bored demeanor that was clearly a cultivated tactic. He scrolled through a tablet, his finger tracing her career path. Iraq, 2018 to 2019, assigned to Task Force 16. Afghanistan, 2020, Bagram Airfield, SIGINT analysis. Standard stuff. And then, he paused, tapping the screen for emphasis. "We have a gap. 6 months. From March to September of 2021. Your file lists your location as classified assignment, CONUS. That's it. No unit, no mission details. What were you doing for those 6 months, Major?" Emily had already answered this question 4 times. Her response was the same each time, delivered in a steady, even tone that was a testament to her iron-willed discipline. "I was assigned to a Joint Intelligence Fusion Center, sir. The location and the nature of the mission are classified above my current clearance level to discuss." "That's convenient," Carter replied, a sarcastic edge to his voice. "A classified assignment that you can't talk about. An assignment that just so happens to coincide with a period where you might have had the opportunity to, say, cross-train with special operations units. Don't you think that's a little too neat, Major?" Emily met his gaze and held it, her expression a perfect blank. Her story was the one she had been briefed to tell, the one she had rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times. It was a perfect, unassailable wall of operational security, a wall that had protected her for years. But for the first time, sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights of this underground room, she felt the first hairline cracks begin to appear in its foundation. They pivoted to her personal life. Financial records, phone logs, social media history, what little of it existed. They wanted to know about every significant purchase, every long-distance call. "You have no debt, Major," said Davis, the second interrogator. "Your credit is perfect. You live a very Spartan life. No expensive hobbies, no lavish vacations. You have a savings account with a substantial balance. Where did that money come from?" "My salary and deployment bonuses, ma'am," Emily answered truthfully. "And you have no significant personal relationships," Davis pressed. "No spouse, no long-term partner. Your emergency contact is your father, a retired high school history teacher in Ohio. You seem to be a woman with very few attachments. A ghost. Is that by design?" The questions were relentless, a constant, draining flood designed to wear her down, to make her feel isolated and exposed. They were trying to build a psychological profile of a spy, a traitor. They were painting a picture of a woman with a secret life. And the most frustrating part for Emily was that they were right. They had the right picture, but they were looking at it from the wrong angle. They brought her water in a paper cup and a dry, tasteless sandwich on a plastic tray, but the questioning never stopped. The clock on the wall crept past midnight. Emily knew the technique. Exhaustion and repetition. Keep asking the same questions in slightly different ways until the subject's mind, weary from lack of sleep and constant stress, either breaks down or makes a fatal slip-up. Colonel Stone returned to the room near 2 a.m., holding a fresh cup of coffee. She looked as alert and focused as she had 6 hours earlier. She sat down, her movements controlled and precise. "Major, we've been at this for a very long time, and your story hasn't wavered. Not once. That's either a sign of remarkable consistency, or it's a sign of very, very good preparation." She opened a new file on her tablet, and a fresh wave of tension washed over the room. "But here's the thing that's bothering me. We've spent the last few hours contacting every Joint Intelligence Fusion Center that was operational on U.S. soil during your 6-month assignment. We've cross-referenced every roster, every temporary duty assignment log. And you know what we found?" She paused, letting the question hang in the cold, sterile air. "None of them have any record of you, Major. Not a single one. It's as if, for 6 months, you simply ceased to exist." The moment Colonel Stone uttered those words, Emily felt a cold knot form in the pit of her stomach. This was the precipice. The carefully constructed wall of her cover story, the one she had relied on for 3 years, had just been systematically dismantled. She maintained her composure, her face a mask of disciplined calm, but inside, her mind was racing. The protocols for this eventuality were clear, but they had always seemed like a distant, abstract possibility. Now, that possibility was her reality. "Ma'am," she began, her voice steady, though it took a conscious effort to keep it from trembling. "If the assignment was classified at the level I believe it was, it's possible that those records would not be accessible through normal channels. They may be held in a completely separate, compartmentalized system." Stone laughed. It was not a sound of humor, but a sharp, brittle noise of pure cynicism. "Normal channels? Major, let me be perfectly clear. I have access to channels that most people in this building, including general officers, don't even know exist. If you were assigned to a legitimate U.S. government facility, I would know about it. My clearance level doesn't have a ceiling. It has a key to every door. So let's stop playing games." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone. "We're not here to break you, Major. We're here to understand. What are you hiding? And more importantly, why are you hiding it? Are you protecting an asset, an operation, or are you protecting yourself?" The interrogation continued, but the tone had shifted. It was no longer about finding inconsistencies in her story. It was about breaking through her silence. The questions became more direct, more accusatory. "Who recruited you, Major?" Carter asked, his bored demeanor replaced by a sharp intensity. "Was it a foreign intelligence service? The Russians? The Chinese? They're known for playing the long game, embedding assets for years before activating them. Have you received any unauthorized payments?" Davis pressed. "Any untraceable deposits?" "We can find them, Major. It just takes time." Emily's response to each question was the same. A respectful but firm refusal to answer on the grounds that it pertained to a classified matter she was not authorized to discuss. With each repetition, she could feel their frustration mounting. She was a lockbox, and they didn't have the key. But they also had a crowbar, and they were prepared to use it. The hours bled together. The sterile white walls seemed to close in, the silence between questions pressing down on her. The exhaustion was a physical weight, a dull ache behind her eyes, and a heaviness in her limbs. She knew they were watching for any sign of weakness, a slump in her posture, a waver in her voice, a flicker of fear in her eyes. She gave him nothing. She retreated into the fortress of her mind, focusing on her breathing, on the cold, hard feel of the metal table beneath her hands, on the absolute necessity of maintaining her discipline. "Let's be direct, Major," Stone said, her patience finally wearing thin. She tossed her tablet onto the table with a clatter. "We know you're hiding something. The only question that remains is whether you're a traitor or a patriot who has been put in an impossible position. Are you protecting a legitimate, albeit deeply buried, U.S. operation, or are you a foreign agent? Right now, given the evidence, or lack thereof, I'm leaning toward the latter." And if that's the case, you will spend the rest of your life in a very small room, much like this one, and you will never see the light of day again. The threat was stark and unambiguous. Treason. It was the ultimate accusation, the final play in their psychological game. Emily looked up at the sterile white ceiling, the single red light of the recording device glowing in her peripheral vision. She had reached the end of her pre-approved script. The cover story was no longer tenable. She was at a crossroads. She could either maintain her silence and risk everything on the hope that someone, somewhere, would intervene, or she could use the final, emergency key she had been given 3 years ago. A key she had been ordered never to use unless it was a matter of life and death. Looking at the cold, determined faces of her interrogators, she realized that moment had arrived. Emily took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the cold, recycled air fill her lungs. The oath she had taken 3 years prior, in a windowless room not unlike this one, had been specific and absolute. She was never to speak of what happened. She was to live the life of Major Emily Carter, and the ghost of Olivia Reed was to remain buried forever. But sitting here, under the weight of a potential treason charge, she knew that the protocols had shifted. Her pre-approved cover was no longer a shield. It was a cage. This was a one-way street. She had to open a new door, or the one behind her would be sealed forever. "Colonel," she began carefully, her voice low and steady, her eyes meeting Stone's directly. "Let's speak hypothetically for a moment." Stone leaned forward, her expression a mixture of surprise and intense focus. She sensed a crack in the armor. "I'm listening." "Hypothetically," Emily continued, choosing her words with the precision of a bomb disposal expert. "If an officer were to come into possession of information that was classified so far beyond their own clearance level that even acknowledging its existence would be a breach of national security, what would be the proper procedure for addressing that situation without compromising the integrity of the original operation?" Stone's eyes narrowed. This was not the confession she had expected. It was a move, a calculated gambit. That would depend entirely on how that officer came to possess such information, and, more importantly, who authorized their access to it in the first place. Emily held her gaze, a silent negotiation passing between them. This was her final offer. "Then I need you to make a phone call," she said, her voice dropping to an almost whisper. "To whom?" Stone asked, her voice tight with expectation. "Admiral James Olson," Emily said, the name landing in the sterile room with a palpable weight. "Naval Special Warfare Command." Stone's expression didn't change, but Emily could see a flicker of something in her eyes. Recognition. Admiral Olson was a legend, a 4-star officer who operated in the deepest, darkest corners of the military establishment. Emily paused for a beat, letting the name and its implications sink in. Then she delivered the key. "Tell him that Obsidian Whisper needs to come in from the cold." The effect was immediate and seismic. The confident, predatory mask on Colonel Stone's face shattered. It was replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock, which quickly morphed into something that looked almost like fear. She stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped loudly against the concrete floor, the sound harsh and jarring in the quiet room. What did you just say?" she whispered, the cold calculation gone from her eyes, replaced by a wide-eyed disbelief. "Operation Obsidian Whisper," Emily repeated, her voice firm now, the decision made. "Admiral Olson will know what it means." Stone was already reaching for her secure satellite phone, her hand trembling slightly. The practiced, unshakable composure of the master interrogator had evaporated in an instant. She stared at Emily, not as a subject, but as something else entirely, a ghost, a living secret she had accidentally unearthed. She turned away, shielding the phone with her body as if she were afraid the very walls were listening. "This interview is suspended," she announced to the room, her voice strained, "pending further investigation." The interrogation had come to a sudden, dramatic halt. The other 2 interrogators looked at Stone, then at Emily, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. Stone waved them out of the room with a frantic, dismissive gesture. The heavy steel door hissed shut, leaving Emily alone in the cold, silent room. The only sound was the faint, electronic hum of the recording device, its red light still glowing. She had just detonated a bomb in the heart of the Pentagon's intelligence apparatus. She had played her last card, a desperate, high-stakes gamble. She had no idea if it would save her or utterly destroy her. All she could do now was wait for the fallout. The secure satellite phone in Colonel Stone's hands seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. Her confident, predatory demeanor had not just cracked. It had been vaporized the moment Emily uttered the two words, Obsidian Whisper. The fluorescent lights in the windowless room hummed overhead, casting harsh, sterile shadows that made the concrete walls feel even more claustrophobic. Emily watched as Stone, her face a mask of shock and dawning alarm, paced the small confines of the room like a caged animal. The colonel's fingers, usually so steady and precise, hovered over the keypad for a long, agonizing moment before she finally began dialing. Her voice, when she spoke, was hushed and urgent. "This is Colonel Stone, DIA. I need to speak with Admiral James Olsen. Immediately. Priority Alpha clearance." She paused, listening to the response from the other end of the line. Her face tightened. "I don't care what time it is. I don't care if he's in a meeting with God. You wake him up. You tell him it's about Obsidian Whisper." The waiting was the hardest part. The silence that followed was different from the tactical silence of the interrogation. It was a heavy, anxious void. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Each tick of the clock on the wall was like a hammer blow against Emily's exhausted psyche. Her body, trained to endure extreme physical and psychological stress, was now running on fumes. She had played her final card, a high-stakes gamble with her career, her freedom, and perhaps even her life. She was no longer fighting against an interrogation. She was waiting to be judged by the architect of the very secret she had spent 3 years protecting. She closed her eyes, the memories of a life that no longer officially existed threatening to break through the carefully constructed walls of her mind. The dust of Yemen, the scent of cordite and spice, the low murmur of a language she had learned to speak fluently. It all came rushing back, a sensory flood she had suppressed for so long. Nearly half an hour later, the door burst open with such force that it slammed against the concrete wall with a deafening bang. Admiral James Olsen strode into the room. Even at 65, he was a formidable presence, a legend in naval special warfare circles who had commanded SEAL teams in conflicts that officially never happened, in operations that would never appear in any history book. He was still dressed in civilian clothes, a dark suit and tie that suggested he had been pulled from his bed in the middle of the night. His steel-gray eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept the room, taking in Colonel Stone's nervous posture and Emily's exhausted but defiant expression. When his gaze finally settled on Emily, something shifted in his weathered features. It was a flicker of recognition, followed by an emotion that was difficult to read. It might have been relief, or it might have been a deep, simmering anger. "Everyone out," Olsen commanded. His voice was not loud, but it carried the absolute, unquestionable authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed without hesitation. "Now, Admiral, this is a DIA investigation." Colonel Stone began to protest, her professional indignation struggling to reassert itself. "I have a potential traitor in my custody." "Colonel Stone," Olsen interrupted, his tone dropping to a dangerous whisper that was far more cutting than a shout. "You're about to stumble into water so deep that your security clearance won't even get you a life jacket. I suggest you and your people take a walk, go get some coffee, and wait outside until you are told otherwise." The room cleared in seconds. The heavy door hissed shut, leaving Emily alone with the Admiral. The air, already heavy with unspoken tension, was now thick with a shared, buried history. Olsen moved to the recording device and switched it off with a decisive click. He then produced a small, black electronic device from his pocket and activated it. A barely audible, high-pitched hum filled the room, a signal jammer that would defeat any other listening devices. He then sat down in the chair across from her, his presence seeming to shrink the sterile space. "Major Emily Carter," he said, his voice softer now, devoid of the previous command. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. Or should I say, Olivia Reed, war correspondent for the International News Network. The name, her real name, hit Emily like a physical blow. 1,000 emotions she had carefully suppressed for 3 long years threatened to spill over. It was the name she had buried, the person she had been forced to kill in a stage car bombing in Damascus. Tears, hot and unexpected, welled in her eyes, a sign of weakness she hadn't allowed herself to show during 6 hours of relentless interrogation. "Admiral," she said, her voice a fragile, broken whisper. "I wasn't sure you'd remember." Olsen let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "Remember? Major, what you did in Yemen is burned into my memory like a brand. The question is, how the hell did you end up in a DIA interrogation room playing mind games with David Hall?" Speaking to the only person on the planet who understood the truth, Emily recounted the encounter with General Hall. She described the tense atmosphere of the evaluation, the general's psychological probing, and the sudden, shocking use of the seal hand signal. She explained the test, the dropped mug, and the subsequent investigation that had led her to this cold, underground room. As she spoke, Admiral Olsen's expression grew darker, his jaw tightening with what appeared to be a barely controlled, incandescent anger. "Those idiots," Olsen growled, the words a low, menacing distillation of his contempt for the Pentagon's bureaucratic infighting and Hall's reckless tactics. "Those damn, arrogant fools. They nearly blew an Operation 3 years in the making over a juvenile game of cat and mouse." He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. His eyes were no longer fixed on her as a military asset, but on her face, on the person he saw beneath the uniform. The air in the room, already heavy with the past, now felt charged with an intimate, personal history. "Olivia," he said, using her real name for the first time since he'd entered. The sound of it, a ghost from a life she had buried, hit Emily with a force she hadn't anticipated. It was a word that brought back the oppressive heat of the Yemeni sun, the scent of spent gunpowder, and the crushing weight of a responsibility she thought she had left behind forever. Her composure, so meticulously maintained for so long, threatened to splinter. "I need to know," he continued, his voice softer now, but no less demanding. "Have you told them anything? Anything at all about Yemen?" "Nothing, sir." "Emily," Olivia replied, her voice regaining its firmness, a testament to the discipline that had become her second nature. "I maintained operational security exactly as briefed. I gave them the key, the 2 words I was told to use if I was ever cornered. Obsidian Whisper. That's all." Olsen nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture of approval. "Good, because what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room. And after tonight, we may never be able to speak of it again." He stood and began to pace the small room, his hands clasped behind his back, a gesture Emily remembered from their brief, intense time together 3 years ago. It was the posture of a man wrestling with a strategic puzzle of immense consequence, a silent language they both understood. Operation Obsidian Whisper was conceived in the aftermath of a series of catastrophic intelligence failures. Olsen began, his voice taking on the official, somber tone of a debriefing. "We had concrete, irrefutable intelligence that a well-funded and highly disciplined terrorist cell operating out of Yemen had acquired chemical weapons. Not some small-scale dirty bomb. They had managed to get their hands on military-grade sarin gas from a corrupt government stockpile, enough to cause widespread, catastrophic damage." He stopped pacing and looked at her. The intelligence suggested the attack was scheduled to coincide with a major international summit on U.S. soil. We were looking at a potential body count in the tens of thousands. A silent, invisible war that would be over before anyone even knew it had begun. The sheer scale of what she had helped prevent, the horrifying details of a mission she had only known in fragments, hit Emily with a sickening force. Her mission wasn't just to save a team. It was to save a city. The problem, Olsen continued, was that this cell had gone completely dark. No electronic communications, no financial transactions we could trace. They were using human couriers exclusively, and they had become experts at spotting our traditional operatives from a mile away. We couldn't get anyone close. We needed someone who could move freely through the region, ask questions, and blend in without arousing suspicion. A non-official cover, a war correspondent with legitimate credentials and a plausible reason for being there. That's where I came in, Emily said quietly. Exactly. What we didn't expect was how quickly you'd adapt. 2 weeks. That's all we had. 2 weeks of intensive training at a black site facility in Nevada that doesn't appear on any map. You learn tactical hand signals, radio protocols, extraction procedures, basic field medicine. The SEALs were skeptical at first. They saw you as a liability, a civilian they'd been forced to babysit. But you threw yourself into that training with a determination that stunned even our most seasoned operators. He smiled faintly. The team leader, Chief Jackson Ford, told me you were the fastest study he'd ever worked with. By the end of the first week, you were communicating with the team using their own protocols like you'd been doing it for years. Emily allowed herself a small, fleeting smile at the memory of Chief Ford, a gruff, no-nonsense veteran who had initially refused to speak to her beyond operational necessities. By the end of their mission, he had been calling her Doc and treating her like a member of his own team. The insertion went perfectly, Olson said, his voice taking on the cadence of an after-action report. You established contact with the cell within 48 hours, gained their trust, and began feeding us intelligence about their network. For 3 weeks, everything went according to plan. But Emily remembered the moment everything went wrong. The morning she had arrived at the designated safe house to find it empty, save for a single, dark bloodstain on the floor and a hastily scrawled message in Arabic that translated to, "The Americans are here." The cell had been feeding us false information, Olson continued, his voice grim. They knew about you from the beginning. They were using you to identify our assets and map our network. When they finally made their move, they hit 3 of our locations simultaneously. They trapped Ford's team in a multi-story building in the old city, completely surrounded by hostile forces with no way out. Emily closed her eyes, the memory still vivid, still terrifying. The panic in Chief Ford's voice over the radio. The news that the extraction helicopter had been shot down. The backup team, hours away. That's when you made the decision that saved 6 American lives, Olson said softly. You could have run. You could have maintained your cover and walked away, and no one would have blamed you. Instead, you chose to blow your cover, hijack the terrorists' own radio network, and coordinate the entire rescue operation yourself. She had become the ghost in their machine. Using the terrorist cell's own encrypted radio equipment, she had become a phantom voice, a disembodied presence directing a symphony of chaos. She simultaneously fed false information to the terrorist commanders, sending their forces on wild goose chases to phantom sightings of American troops, while guiding Chief Ford's trapped team through a labyrinth of hostile territory. She used the hand signals and radio protocols she had learned just weeks before, her mind working with a clarity and precision born of pure adrenaline. The extraction was a masterpiece of improvisation, Olson said, his voice filled with a genuine, unreserved admiration. You turned their own communication network against them. You created diversions, you anticipated their movements, and you guided our teams to a secondary extraction point through routes that, by all accounts, shouldn't have existed. It was exceptional. He paused, the weight of the next part of the story settling in the room. After the extraction, we had a problem. A big one. Your cover was blown, but the wider terrorist network was still operational. We couldn't risk them discovering that the journalist they had been manipulating was actually an asset working with American Special Forces. The fallout would have been catastrophic, compromising dozens of other operations in the region. So we erased you. Olivia Reed, war correspondent, died in a car bombing in Damascus. Emily said, the words a cold, factual summary of her own death. The body was never recovered. My network was told I'd been killed while investigating a story. Olson's expression was grim, and Major Emily Carter, after a classified 6-month gap in her service record, returned to her Army intelligence career with strict orders never to speak of what had happened in Yemen. Not to anyone. Ever. He let out a long, weary sigh. Now you understand why the interrogation was so intense. From their perspective, Your knowledge of SEAL protocols looked like a massive security breach. The truth was buried so deep, classified at a level so high, that even a DIA colonel with top-level clearance couldn't access it. Not until you gave them the key. Admiral, Emily said carefully, the weight of her past, now a physical presence in the room. What happens now? Olsen was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, weighing his words. Now, Major, we have to decide whether Obsidian Whisper stays buried, or whether it's time for the truth to come out. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of the past, the present, and an uncertain future. The cold, sterile air of the interrogation room seemed to crackle with an unspoken energy. For Emily, the choice wasn't a simple binary. It was an impossible paradox. To keep the secret was to preserve the operational security she had sworn to uphold, to continue living a life defined by a lie. But to reveal it was to open a Pandora's box, to unleash forces she couldn't possibly anticipate. Before she could formulate a response, Olsen began to speak again, his voice dropping to a low, chilling tremor. Circumstances have changed, Major. His eyes, which had held the distant look of a historian, now snapped into a sharp, focused intensity. 3 months ago, we received intelligence that remnants of that terrorist cell from Yemen have regrouped. They found new funding, new leadership, and they have a new, all-consuming obsession. He stopped and looked directly at her, his eyes holding the haunted look of a man who had stared into the abyss. For 3 years, they've been hunting for the mysterious journalist who they believe single-handedly destroyed their plans. They know Olivia Reed is officially dead, but they've pieced together enough chatter, enough whispers in the dark, to suspect she had help. Help from someone who is still alive. Someone with a direct connection to American Special Forces. The words landed on Emily like a physical blow. The chill she had felt earlier deepened, becoming a cold dread that settled deep in her bones. A primal fear that her carefully constructed wall of anonymity was not a fortress, but a fragile glass house. They're looking for me, Emily said, the words barely audible, a fragile whisper of a ghost acknowledging its own existence. Not just you, Olsen corrected, his voice now a dangerous, low-pitched growl, his eyes fixed on hers with an unwavering intensity. He was no longer just an admiral. He was a sentinel, warning her of a clear and present danger. They're looking for anyone connected to Obsidian Whisper. That includes the SEAL team you saved, the support personnel who set up the safe houses, the analysts who processed the intel. And yes, the intelligence officer who somehow learned their protocols well enough to coordinate a rescue operation. He leaned closer, the full, brutal reality of his words hitting her with sickening finality. Your knowledge of those hand signals isn't just a security concern anymore, Major. It's a target painted on your back. It's a neon sign broadcasting your existence to a group of men who are now solely focused on revenge. Your ghost identity is no longer your shield. It's your greatest vulnerability. The implication was staggering, a cold, brutal twist of fate. For 3 years, Emily had believed her anonymity was her protection, a wall of classification that made her invisible. But it had all been an illusion. The very secrecy that had made her a ghost in the system had now made her a target. Her careful maintenance of operational security, her unflinching silence during the interrogation, it had all served to confirm the terrorists' worst fears. Her existence, and the fact that she was still an active part of the military system, had validated their suspicion that they had been betrayed by a deep-cover insider. The DIA's interrogation, while a misguided test initiated by General Hall, had unknowingly confirmed a terrifying piece of intelligence for the enemy. The hand signal, the one that had broken Hall's composure and launched her into this underground room, was not a test from Hall alone. It was an echo of a threat that was now actively hunting for her and for everyone she had ever worked with. The weight of this new truth was immense. Emily realized her decision was no longer just about her career or her freedom. It was about the lives of Chief Jackson Ford and the other 5 men she had guided to safety. It was about protecting the legacy of an operation that had saved thousands of American lives. Her secrecy The very thing she had been praised for had become a liability. Her anonymity was not a protection. It was a ticking time bomb. The longer she remained a ghost, the more dangerous she became to those she had sought to protect. The terrorists would continue their hunt, their search a relentless, methodical process that would eventually lead them to the truth. And when they found it, the fallout would be catastrophic. "What are you proposing, Admiral?" Emily finally asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside her. Olsen moved to the metal table, leaning forward with his hands planted firmly on the cold surface. "Full disclosure, we bring Obsidian Whisper out of the black. We declassify what we can internally. We give you the recognition you've earned. More importantly, we put you under the protection of a new joint task force designed specifically to counter this threat. We use you, Major. We weaponize your experience. We let the world know, our world, at least, what you did, and we make it clear that you are under the full protection of the United States government." Before Emily could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the room. Olsen deactivated the jammer and called out, "Enter." Colonel Stone stepped in, her earlier confidence replaced by an obvious, palpable nervousness. "Admiral, I have General Hall and the Secretary of Defense on a secure video conference. They're demanding an immediate briefing on this situation. General Hall, he wants you to bring Major Carter with you." Olsen nodded grimly. "It's time." He turned to Emily, his expression deadly serious. "Major, what happens in the next hour will determine the rest of your career. It will define the rest of your life. Are you ready?" The question hung in the air, a final challenge, a grim acceptance of her fate. The ghost of Olivia Reed was about to step into the light. Her years of silence were over. The quiet, anonymous life she had built was about to be shattered. The war she had fought in the shadows was about to become very, very public. And she knew with an absolute certainty that chilled her to the bone that the real fight was just beginning. The journey to the secure conference room felt like a walk to the gallows. Flanked by Admiral Olsen and a visibly humbled Colonel Stone, Emily moved through corridors that seemed to grow more imposing with each step. The air was heavy, charged with the kind of silent dread that precedes a storm. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a reckoning. She was no longer a major under suspicion, but an exhibit, the living proof of a secret that had been carefully buried for 3 years, a secret that was now about to be thrust onto the table of the highest echelons of military power. The fluorescent lights glinted off the polished floors, the rhythmic thump of their footsteps the only sound in the somber march toward a destiny she had no control over. The conference room they entered was a testament to American military might and technological prowess. The walls were lined not with commendations, but with secure communication arrays, multiple large screens displaying classified data streams, and a vast, polished table that had hosted decisions affecting global security for decades. General Hall was already seated at the table, his earlier shock replaced by a grim, chastened determination. His eyes met Emily's for a brief moment, and in them, she saw not the cunning predator from his office, but a man wrestling with a profound professional and personal reassessment. On the main screen, the face of Secretary of Defense Robert Williams appeared via a secure video link, his expression unreadable, a stone-faced arbiter of fate. Emily also recognized 2 other figures in the room. General Patricia Hawkins, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a woman whose reputation for surgical precision in strategic planning was legendary, and Director Michael Vance of the DIA, whose gaze was as cold and calculating as Colonel Stone's. "Admiral Olsen," Secretary Williams began, his voice devoid of preamble, "I understand we have a situation that requires immediate clarification. Please proceed with your briefing." Olsen nodded grimly and activated a presentation system. The room's multiple screens instantly filled with a cascade of classified documents, satellite imagery, and operational timelines. The voiceover began, and Emily felt like a ghost watching her own history unfold. "Mr. Secretary, Generals, Director," Olsen's voice was a steady, professional instrument. 3 years ago, Naval Special Warfare Command conducted a classified operation designated Obsidian Whisper. The mission was conceived in the aftermath of intelligence indicating a terrorist cell in Yemen had acquired chemical weapons, specifically sarin gas, from government stockpiles. The cell was planning a coordinated attack on American soil. The operation was designed to prevent this catastrophe. As Olsen methodically detailed the mission, Emily watched the faces around the table transform. Skepticism morphed into amazement, and amazement into a profound sense of awe and gravity. The satellite imagery showed the terrorist compound in stark detail. The screens displayed intricate diagrams of the cell's command structure and their human courier network, the very network Emily had spent weeks infiltrating. The officials, seasoned military leaders who had seen everything, were captivated by the sheer audacity and scale of the operation. Olsen's voice continued, a monotone narration of a desperate, high-stakes game. He explained why they needed an embedded asset, someone who could operate in a world without digital footprints. He explained why they chose Olivia Reed. The operation was successful beyond our most optimistic projections. Olsen continued, a hint of pride in his tone. The terrorist cell was neutralized, the chemical weapons were secured, and thousands of American lives were saved. However, the operation required the participation of an individual whose involvement had to remain classified. This individual volunteered for an assignment that required her to assume a false identity, infiltrate a terrorist organization, and coordinate with a SEAL team using protocols she learned in just 2 weeks. The screens flashed, and a new element appeared. The grainy, black and white footage from a SEAL team's helmet cam. The shaky video showed a dark, hostile maze of alleyways and crumbling buildings. Over the radio, a voice, a female voice, her voice, but younger, more frantic, crackled with a chilling, professional calm. Bravo team, move to checkpoint 5. Diversion Alpha is live. The enemy is moving north. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. The footage showed the team leader, Chief Ford, making subtle hand signals in response. Then the video shifted to a drone's perspective, a high-altitude shot of the city, showing a small, lone figure moving through the chaos on a distant rooftop. The radio voice continued, 2 hostiles on your 6. Take the lower path. I'm rerouting their patrol. The officials at the table, who had only heard whispers of Emily's courage, were now watching it unfold in real time. General Hawkins leaned forward, her expression a mix of awe and disbelief. She was guiding them through a hostile city, using a communication network she hijacked from the enemy. Her voice, normally an impassive instrument of command, held a note of genuine shock. That is correct, General, Olsen confirmed. Her performance was exceptional. Secretary Williams, who had been silent, finally spoke, his eyes fixed on Emily through the video link. Major Carter, why didn't you reveal this during your interrogation? Emily stood at attention, her voice steady and clear. Sir, I was bound by operational security protocols that prohibited disclosure without proper authorization. I maintained those protocols until I was certain that revealing the information was necessary to prevent a greater security breach. I provided the code, Obsidian Whisper, as instructed. Director Vance spoke for the first time. Admiral, what's the current threat assessment? Why is this coming to us now? Olsen's expression darkened. Intelligence indicates the remnants of that cell are actively seeking revenge. Major Carter's knowledge of SEAL protocols, while legitimately acquired, makes her a target. She is a beacon. We need to bring her under protective oversight while utilizing her unique experience. The room fell silent. General Hawkins was the first to speak. Admiral, what are you recommending? I'm recommending Major Carter be assigned to a new joint task force focused on this threat. Her experience makes her uniquely qualified. The weight of the decision settled on the Secretary of Defense. On the main screen, his expression remained unreadable. General Hall, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. Your final assessment of Major Carter, given your initial encounter? All eyes turned to Hall. He looked directly at Emily, and in his eyes, she saw something that hadn't been there before: respect. "Mr. Secretary," Hall began, his voice clear and devoid of any pretense. Major Carter demonstrated exceptional operational security under the most intense pressure. "She is an officer of unimpeachable integrity and profound competence. I not only approve of Admiral Olson's proposal, but I also endorse her without reservation for any mission deemed critical to national security." With Hall's powerful endorsement, the final piece fell into place. Secretary Williams gave a sharp, decisive nod. "So be it. The proposal is approved." He looked at Emily, his gaze softening slightly. "Major Carter, you have been given a second chance at a first life. Don't waste it." The screens went dark. Her ghost life was over. Her real life, a life of duty, danger, and a newfound purpose, was just beginning. The next morning, the sterile coldness of the interrogation room was replaced by the hushed solemnity of a smaller, more intimate Pentagon conference room. The atmosphere was different, not charged with suspicion, but with a quiet dignity and a sense of shared, weighty purpose. Present were Admiral Olson, a weary but resolute General Hall, and a humbled Colonel Stone. But a different kind of energy filled the room with the arrival of a new figure. Chief Petty Officer Jackson Ford, the team leader from Operation Obsidian Whisper, strode into the room. He had flown in from Virginia Beach overnight. His presence, broad-shouldered and radiating a no-nonsense competence, a tangible link to the world Emily had been forced to leave behind. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, swept the room, dismissing the high-ranking officers, and settled on Emily. A flash of recognition, then raw, unadulterated relief crossed his face. A gruff, heartfelt smile spread across his lips. "Doc," he said, his voice deep and resonant, a sound Emily hadn't heard in 3 years. It was a name, a term of endearment and respect that cut through the military formalities and spoke to a bond forged in the crucible of combat. It was a word that meant more to her than any rank, any medal. It was the word that finally, completely, tore down the walls of her composure. The armor of military discipline she had worn for years cracked, and a genuine, uninhibited smile, one she hadn't realized she was capable of, broke across her face. Ford didn't hesitate. He pulled her into a powerful bear hug that lifted her slightly off the ground, a gesture of deep, unreserved gratitude. "Damn good to see you again," he rumbled, his voice thick with emotion. "Heard you caused quite a stir around here. Never doubted you for a second, though. Not for one damn minute." Emily's laughter was a genuine, heartfelt sound, a release of 3 years of pent-up emotion. "Good to see you too, Chief," she said, her voice catching slightly. "How's the team? Still ugly, still dangerous, and still grateful to be alive? Thanks to you," he said, his expression growing serious as he pulled away. "The Admiral told me about the new assignment. You sure you're ready to get back in the game?" Before she could answer, Admiral Olson stepped forward, carrying a black presentation box. The room grew solemn. "Major Emily Carter," he said, his voice official and resonant. "By order of the Secretary of Defense, you are hereby awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy." Emily's breath caught in her throat. The Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration awarded to an Army officer. It was an honor so profound it bordered on mythical. Olson opened the box to reveal the medal, a bronze cross on a blue and white ribbon. "This award will remain classified," Olson continued. "But know this, Major. Your actions 3 years ago prevented a catastrophe. You are a hero." He pinned the medal to her uniform, its weight a physical reminder of the secret she would continue to carry. General Hall stepped forward next. "Major Carter, I owe you an apology. My test. I never imagined it would uncover a genuine American hero. I stand corrected." Colonel Stone extended her hand. "Major, your professionalism under fire is something I'll be teaching my people for years to come. I'm sorry for what you had to endure." As the ceremony concluded, Chief Ford lingered behind. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn metal object. Doc, got something for you. It was a SEAL Team Challenge coin, its edges worn smooth. This belonged to Petty Officer Riley Chun, Ford said softly. He was the youngest member of our team in Yemen. Kid was scared out of his mind, but your voice on the radio kept him calm. He wanted you to have this. Emily took the coin, its weight heavy in her palm. Where is he now? Ford smiled. He's a chief petty officer now. Married, 2 kids. Still talks about the mysterious journalist who saved his life. Doc, what you did over there, it mattered. You became part of the team. And SEALs, we don't forget our own. The coin held more meaning than the Navy Cross. It was a personal honor, a sacred bond. And so, we close the book on the extraordinary journey of Major Emily Carter, the signal bearer. Her story is a profound meditation on identity, sacrifice, and the quiet courage of those who operate in the shadows. For 3 years, she was a ghost, her past a lie to protect a nation. But a single, instinctive gesture brought that ghost in from the cold, allowing her to finally embrace the full, unvarnished truth of who she is. Her journey reminds us that heroism isn't always a loud, public act. It is often a silent, solitary burden. The Navy Cross on her uniform is a testament to her valor, but the challenge coin in her palm is a testament to something deeper, the sacred bond of a team, a family forged by fire. Here at Veteran Biker, we believe every journey has a story. We are a community that believes in resilience, honor, and courage. Thank you for joining us. Your support allows us to continue bringing these powerful, often untold stories to life. We want to hear from you. Did Emily make the right decision? What did you feel when Chief Ford gave her the coin? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Please comment with respect for the subject matter and for each other. Your feedback helps us build a community that values truth and sacrifice. If you were captivated by this story, hit that like button and subscribe to the Veteran Biker channel so you never miss another epic journey. Check out the other powerful stories appearing on your screen now. Until next time, stay safe on your own journey. And remember that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones you've never heard of.